Okay, great. Well, we will just talk for about 10 or 15 minutes, and it's not
Oh,
live. We'll just put the best parts in, and we'll make it about 3 or 4 minutes.
okay.
And we're
Yes.
going to keep it just sort of like moderating at a public event. We'll keep it pretty topical and light, so
All right.
uh, we won't get too specific here. But oh, and hey, I'm so sorry to hear about your brother.
Yeah, that was grim.
Yeah,
It's so hard, to be on the road and stop the tour and go bury your brother, then go back on the road.
all
Really
right.
weird.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
timing is kind of unfortunate. Um,
Oh
well,
no,
hey.
you're freezing.
Oh, okay. Well, that's okay. I know it looks so strange, but
It's kind of psychedelic. It freezes and then your voice
yeah.
goes. All right.
Um, so we'll talk a little bit about the stories and then a little bit about the poetry collection. But to
Okay.
start with the stories, a lot, some of them are set in the West. You live in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you obviously you have written about the West for a long time, and the border is clearly important to your work, but what is it that attracts you to writing about the West?
I think I'm just a Westerner, and it always comes to mind. It's like my natural milieu. And I always tell my writing students, I think what happens with your writing is that place becomes internalized and becomes more mythological to you in your personal mythos, and then shows up in your work. So it's going to take a real long time for Chicago to show up, for example. Though, Louisiana is in the stories because I lived in Louisiana for a while, and I suspect some of the best years of my life were in the Boston area in New England, and I'm sure that's going to start processing into the stories more too. In fact, the novel I'm writing has a whole lot more of the East Coast in it. So, I think a lot of times when I think of something, I think about the West.
Yeah,
Still.
yeah. And this the woman in the first story, this kind of town in Idaho that's basically dying. How had you traveled in Idaho, or just give me some sense of the inspiration for that one because it's a pretty great story.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I live on the road, brother. I'm always out and about, and I teach at the Fish Trap Writing Gathering or whatever in Eastern Oregon a lot. And so it's often a family event for the week, and then off we go. And one year driving out of there, we went the Idaho way, and we passed through that town uh, that had the painted cliffs. And Cindy said, "Write me a story about that." And I thought, "Are you kidding? No way, man! I can't possibly." But the more I thought about it, the more interesting it became. So, and that woman was just I think she came from Stuart Onan in a funny way. Stuart and I have been pals for a while. Um, my wife calls us idiot savants, because we have this bizarre sort of literary shorthand sometimes when we write to each other. And but he always used to say that he thought that the quintessential American life was somebody waiting all day for the mailman to come, and the only thing that comes is a gas bill. And I thought of her, she just
Yeah,
came to mind as somebody who life had felt like it had passed her by. And I
yeah,
also think I've just got a whole lot of friends now, from the high school era, and we're all thinking, how did I get sore hips? How did I get gray hair? What happened? So she was
right,
that.
right. I was born in Big Spring, which is kind of, out in West Texas by Midland, and that's where my mom grew up, and it has definitely for a long time been a dying town. uh, I mean, greatly decreased in population, and now there's this sort of oil. I don't know if you'd call it a boom, but definitely an oil resurgence in West Texas. So when mom goes back for reunions and stuff, she has to stay in a hotel. Like there's nowhere. It's really hard to even get a hotel room. So it's been a really interesting thing there. So this kind of dying town interested me in that sense. Um,
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it, and you know, I'm fascinated by the kind of, I mean, there's a theme a couple of places in the book of dying places and
mhm,
scarcity of water and so forth. And it's, having lived, of course, being from California and having lived a lot of time in Colorado, you really see the fear and the dread of the Colorado River drying up, or the incredible drought that's consuming California still.
yeah,
And that Story Water Museum came from the Midwestern drought, where we were getting so dry that the ground was cracking, and in some places in the farming areas, the ground actually was separating away from the foundations of the houses. And I thought
mhm,
that's so apocalyptic, the cornfields dying and the ground cracking open, and then the houses sort of coming loose like old molars. I thought, wow, that's the end of the world. It feels like, even though we're sitting
yeah,
next to Lake Michigan. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, and you're coming to the San Antonio Book Festival, so thank you first of all for that. But we're doing a pretty
Yeah.
great um, water panel, and the thing that's interesting me now about water books is that you typically, like from Texas A&M Press or some other small press, you get these wonky kind of analytical,
Yeah.
scientific water books. But now, like, it's three people on the panel, and two of them are really more writing about the sort of human and environmental and just sort of sociological effects of the drought that we're having, and it publishing has caught up, in a nice way, because that's where the story about water is going in the West. It's no longer this like, what are we going to do? It's, this is happening. How do we, as
Oh
humans,
yeah.
how do we, react? So,
I think, I also have that kind of ingrained Edward Abbey complaint, that the East Coast publishers, you just can't convince them that we actually exist in the West, or but let's face it, all the best of us are, Texas and beyond. So, there's a lot of out there, and I think a lot of times it's at the cutting edge of so much, not just environment, but border issues and all that kind of stuff. I just did the Dallas Ideas Festival,
mm,
and that was really fascinating, to stand up in front of Dallas of all places and give them 15 minutes of my great idea of what to do with your city. That was cool.
right, right.
I of course suggested they rip you off and do a new book festival. By the way, they should just follow your example all over
Right,
Texas, man.
right, right,
I was like, the Dallas Festival of the Book, man. Show those hippies in Austin a thing or two,
right. Good luck with that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's gonna work. It'll be the Bush Museum Festival of Books.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So you mentioned your students earlier. Is there one piece of advice you find yourself
Lost you
giving
for a
them?
minute. You went psychedelic again. You
Oh, okay,
froze and your voice started echoing.
okay. So, um, you
Uh,
mentioned your
there, you're
students.
back. You're back.
Oh,
Okay.
good. Okay. You mentioned your students. Is there like one piece of advice you find yourself giving most often to them?
Oh yeah, there are all kinds of pieces of advice I give them, but unfortunately, their careerist urges are at odds with my mystical urges all the time. And so, on a careerist front, I tell them rule number one is wear the bastards down. Keep coming at them until the door cracks, which was my experience. You probably remember that my first book, Across the Wire, was rejected nonstop for 10 years. And somehow, perhaps out of monomaniacal, obsession, I just kept pushing till it ended up getting published. But the other thing I always try to tell students is that at the heart of it, for me, is not a career. It's not it's not a fame machine, and it's certainly for most of us, and hasn't been for me until recently, an avenue toward real income. Either, it has to be a practice, a kind of a journey. So I always tell my students, that if you're going to do stuff with me, you're pursuing your black belt. You're not pursuing fame.
Right.
And as long as we can keep that clear, that we're about the process and this journey that you're on, and this craft that you're learning to open a life way to you. You know, I'm kind of certainly here in Chicago, sort of the weird uh, shamanic teacher compared to my, postmodernist colleagues.
Right, right. Well, speaking of the sort of more mystical elements, I mean, you have this new poetry collection out, um, and I'm curious when a kind of idea or kind of insight comes to you. I- How do you sit there and think, oh, that's better for prose or that's better for poetry, or how does that work for you?
A lot of times it just announces itself. It'll say, because obviously if a haiku comes, it's not a novel. you know, you can't write 600 pages about a butterfly, but sometimes it's kind of confusing. Like Hummingbird's Daughter, it took me 20 years to do that novel, partially because I never knew if it was a history book or not. I thought it might have been some nonfiction epic, footnoted with illustrations and all that stuff. And then there was this moment when it became something else. And I used to say to interviews, you can't footnote a dream. And there was that moment when it started to move into another realm of imagining, and then it was full speed ahead. But then sometimes you're really lucky and you get an assignment. Like Devil's Highway was a straight up assignment from Little Brown. They asked me if I would write it, and my initial response was no way. I don't want to do it, because I was like, I've done all these border books. I don't want to be border boy, and I didn't want the responsibility of all the deaths. What if I misrepresented those people? And of course, the secret was I just was scared of the Border Patrol. It's like, I'm not going to deal with the Border Patrol. But my editor said, if you don't do it, do you trust anyone else to do it? And I said, hell no. And he said, exactly.
Right.
So sometimes it's an assignment, and that helps.
Yeah.
But I think the work tells you what it is a lot of times.
Yeah.
You,
Well, speaking of
because
that, you
oh, I'm
you
sorry.
no, you have this great graphic novel that I thought Cinco Puntos did a great job with,
Yeah, it's
Mr.
beautiful.
Mendoza's Paintbrush, and you returned to the story in prose here in this new collection. Why did you tell me about the thinking behind that?
It was always a story.
Mm.
It was a story first. It's
Yeah, okay.
it's it's certainly in the new collection. It's the oldest story, and it was first published a long time ago in a Chicano journal, and it's just had this really weird life of its own. And so the cartoonist, the artist, found the story,
Mm.
and he wanted to adapt the story. So it was sort of like having a film made of your story, because he adapted it down to a script and then illustrated it. And he went to the town, my family's hometown in Sinaloa, and he
Mm.
drew the town. So all the drawings are the actual town. And then he filled the characters with my relatives. So those are like drawings of my cousins as the boys and stuff. It's really cool.
Oh, that's
But
great.
yeah, it was always a short story.
Yeah. So there's this debate that's kind of raging in publishing right now, and maybe it's more active in children's books than uh, in adult. But this question of diversity
Hang
and
on,
this sort
hang
of
on. You're breaking up.
oh, okay,
Okay, try now.
okay. So you're a leading Latino writer. I mean, do you think that publishers are doing enough to kind of represent diverse voices in their lineups?
I don't know. That is a real issue now. There are a lot of us, and more all the time, which is great. And um, I don't know. When I came up, it was the era of all the crazy little Chicano presses. I mean, there truly was no representation. So, you know, people started presses constantly in their garages. San Antonio had M&A editions, Angela de Hoyos and her husband printing the books, I think, in their garage. So, Bobby Bird was, in El Paso. And we had a whole lot in California and Arizona. to get the books out. And I think now people have a lot more access than they did, and there have been a couple of actual bestsellers, with Latino names on them. But there's always room for more, especially
Yeah.
books by me. Keep them coming.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's a lot better. It's very interesting to watch.
Yeah.
I still don't think they have any idea what to do with us, and I'm sure what I see is that I don't think New York has yet understood that there is no sort of pan-Hispanic movement. Puerto Ricans are not Mexicans, and Cubans aren't any of the above, and so forth. And even within the Chicano community, California Chicanos are definitely not West Texas Chicanos, who are definitely not Central Texas Chicanos, who are definitely not East Texas Chicanos, and are certainly not the Chicanos of New Mexico. So, even within our group, we have all these little subsets, which you can find out simply in differences in slang. Like what people Mexican American communities call beer. You could do a whole chart of the name for beer, from San Diego to San Antonio. It changes every few miles. It's really interesting. So I think people are still looking for that 100 years of solitude that come out of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
That will make everybody say, yeah, that's universal. And I don't know if that's available or not. I think Bless Me Ultima by Rudy Anaya has done a really beautiful thing that way. I think Julia Alvarez's books reach a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly Sandra, Mango Street, I guess, is one of those texts now.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe, if I'm lucky and Hummingbird lasts long enough, maybe it'll have a shot.
Right.
I
Right.
hope.
No, I hope so too. Well, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
We're done with the interview, but I just have one question about San Antonio. We got this request for you to be a judge at Literary Deathmatch,
Oh, really?
which is a really fun. It's on this Saturday night, so you'll have this event during the day where you'll talk about both of your new books. And Literary Death. Do you know about Literary Deathmatch?
I've heard about it.
Yeah.
I think I saw. Do you have some writings about it up or something? I've either seen or heard about it recently.
Yeah.
So you want me to help judge it, huh?
Yeah. So the four writers get 8 minutes each to perform, their most electric passage, and then there are three judges, one in performance, one in literary merit, and one in a category called intangibles, which is just kind of surreal and has nothing to do with the proceedings at hand. And the idea isn't really, you don't have to be mean, but the idea is definitely to be funny and to take things kind of lightly. And so Adrian Todd Zuniga, who created the whole thing, we're flying him in and paying him to MC, and he wants you to do literary merit.
Okay.
So there's no prep. You just need to be funny and good on stage. So, in addition to your daytime thing, we want you to consider
Okay.
that. So does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, that sounds like fun, man.
Okay. Well, we'll do that. Your books will also be for sale there. And then for during the day, I've asked Greg Barrios to moderate your event and ask you questions. He is also, it's like long overdue, but he's being inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters that weekend, so I don't know if the timing is going to work out for him. That's in Houston.
Okay.
But anyway, so we'll get back to you about that. But really happy you're coming. And,
Yeah, me too.
we'll spend some more time there, but thanks for your time.
I lost your signal again.
Oh, no, I just was saying
Yeah.
thanks for your time. And
Thank you. This is cool, man.
yeah, and we'll spend more time together in San Antonio, but congrats on these two books. You did a great job, and we'll get this out in early April.
I lost you.
Oh, okay. Well, thank God we're done.
I know, man. It's getting weird. All right.
Anyway, congrats on both, and
Thank you so much.
thanks, and we'll get this out in early April.
All right, brother. Thanks for everything you do.
Okay, have a good day.
All right. I'll see
Okay.
you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.